Have you ever watched someone pull away from a relationship that seemed perfect on the surface? Have you ever wondered how a person can say, I love you, one day and seem emotionally distant the next? The answer may challenge everything you believe about love, because sometimes people do not leave because love is gone. Sometimes they leave because love is becoming real. And for those who fear intimacy, real love can feel more frightening than loneliness itself. The brutal reality is this: many avoidant individuals do not fall out of love in the way people assume. What often happens is that they reach a point where the relationship begins demanding something deeper than attraction, chemistry, or comfort. It begins requiring vulnerability. It begins requiring emotional exposure. It begins requiring them to be seen completely. And that is where the internal battle starts. When a person has spent years protecting themselves from emotional pain, they learn to build walls that feel like a safe. At why? Those walls may have been created in childhood. They may have been built after heartbreak, betrayal, disappointment, or abandonment. Over time, self protection becomes second nature. Distance becomes familiar. Independence becomes an identity. Then love arrives. At first, everything feels exciting because the relationship exists at a safe distance. There is mystery, there is pursuit, there is possibility. But as connection deepens, the walls begin to shake. Suddenly, the avoidant person feels exposed. The closer someone gets, the more vulnerable they become. And vulnerability feels dangerous to a heart trained to survive rather than trust. This is why many avoidants mistake fear for a loss of feelings. The relationship is not becoming weaker. It is becoming deeper. The love is not disappearing. It is demanding growth. The connection is not failing. It is revealing wounds that have never been healed. And instead of facing those wounds, many people unconsciously convince themselves that the problem is the relationship itself. They start focusing on flaws. They start questioning their feelings. They start imagining that freedom exists somewhere else. They tell themselves they need space. But the truth is often far more profound. You cannot run from intimacy without eventually running from yourself. Life teaches us a powerful principle. Every lesson we refuse to learn will return in a different form until we are willing to face it. The relationship may change, the faces may change, the circumstances may change, but the unresolved fear remains the same. That is why emotional distance never creates true freedom. Freedom is not the absence of connection. Freedom is the ability to remain connected without losing yourself. Real love is not simply about finding the right person. It is about becoming the kind of person who can receive love without fear and give love without conditions. And this requires courage. The courage to stay present when vulnerability appears. Courage to communicate instead of withdrawing. The courage to face old wounds instead of projecting them onto new relationships. The courage to understand that discomfort is not always a sign to leave. Sometimes it is a sign that healing is finally beginning. Many people spend years searching for the perfect relationship while avoiding the inner work that makes healthy love possible. Yet the deepest transformation occurs when a person realizes that the greatest obstacle to love is not another person idea, is the fear living within themselves. The divine principle here is simple. What we resist persists, but what we face can be transformed. The moment you stop running from your fears, those fears begin to lose their power. The moment you stop protecting your wounds, those wounds begin to heal. The moment you stop mistaking vulnerability for weakness, you discover that vulnerability is actually strength in its purest form. Love was never meant to be an escape from growth. Love is growth. Lo. V is the mirror that reveals who we are. Love is the invitation to become more patient, more honest, more compassionate, and more whole. So if someone appears to have fallen out of love, understand that the visible story is not always the real story. Beneath the surface, there may be a battle between fear and connection, between self-protection and surrender, between old wounds and new possibilities. And for every person listening today, remember this: the quality of your relationships will never rise above the quality of your relationship with yourself. Heal your fears, face your wounds, choose courage over avoidance. Because the strongest hearts are not the ones that never feel fear. The strongest hearts are the ones that feel fear and choose love anyway. And when you reach that place, love stops being something you run from. It becomes something you are finally strong enough to keep. One of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant behavior is the tendency to confuse emotional discomfort with a genuine loss of love. To the outside world, it may appear as though an avoidant person suddenly loses interest, changes their feelings, or decides the relationship is no longer right. But beneath the surface, something much more complex is often taking place. What feels like the end of love may actually be the beginning of emotional discomfort that they do not fully understand how to process. When relationships are new, they often feel exciting and manageable. There is space, curiosity, and a certain level of emotional safety because neither person is fully dependent on the other yet. The connection exists without requiring deep vulnerability. For an avoidant individual, this stage can feel comfortable because they can enjoy the positive emotions of love without confronting the deeper fears that intimacy eventually awakens. As the relationship grows stronger, however, the emotional stakes begin to rise. Trust develops, expectations increase, the bond becomes more meaningful, full. The other person becomes more important. What once felt light and effortless starts demanding a greater level of emotional presence. This is where many avoidant individuals begin experiencing internal tension. The deeper the connection becomes, the more they realize they have something valuable to lose. For most people, this realization strengthens commitment. For someone with avoidant tendencies, it can trigger anxiety. The closer they become to another person, the more vulnerable they feel. Vulnerability means opening the door to disappointment, rejection, abandonment, criticism, or emotional pain. Even when there is no actual threat in the relationship, their nervous system may react as if danger is approaching. Because this discomfort feels so intense, the mind naturally searches for an explanation. Instead of recognizing, I am feeling vulnerable, they may unconsciously conclude, maybe I am not in love anymore. Instead of thinking, this relationship is becoming important. To me, they may interpret the emotional intensity as evidence that something is wrong. Instead of seeing fear, they see doubt. Instead of recognizing anxiety, they assume their feelings have changed. This confusion can create a powerful cycle. The more uncomfortable they feel, the more they question the relationship. The more they question the relationship, the more emotionally distant they become. As distance increases, emotional connection weakens temporarily, which then seems to confirm their belief that love is fading. What they often fail to recognize is that emotional discomfort and lack of love are not the same thing. In fact, some of the greatest discomfort people experience in relationships comes precisely because they care deeply. When someone truly matters, emotions become more intense. The possibility of loss becomes more real. The desire to protect oneself becomes stronger. These experiences are natural parts of intimacy, but for avoidant individuals, they can feel overwhelming. Elming. Another reason this confusion occurs is that avoidants often value emotional control. They feel secure when they can manage their emotions independently. Deep love challenges that sense of control. Suddenly, another person has the ability to affect their mood, influence their decisions, and touch parts of their heart that have remained protected for years. This loss of emotional control can feel unsettling. As a result, they may begin longing for the emotional simplicity they experienced before the relationship became serious. They remember a time when they felt less vulnerable and less emotionally exposed. Their mind may romanticize distance and independence while overlooking the loneliness that often accompanied them. The reality is that healthy love naturally involves periods of uncertainty, vulnerability, and emotional discomfort. These experiences are not signs that love is disappearing. They are signs that love is moving beyond surface level attraction and entering a deeper, R stage of connection. The challenge for avoidant individuals is learning to sit with discomfort long enough to understand what it truly means. Not every feeling of anxiety is a warning. Not every moment of doubt is a signal to leave. Not every emotional struggle indicates that love has ended. Sometimes the heart is not falling out of love at all. Sometimes it is simply encountering the fears that genuine love has brought to the surface. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most powerful forces operating beneath avoidant behavior. It is often invisible to others and, in many cases, invisible even to the avoidant person themselves. What appears on the surface as emotional distance, hesitation, or withdrawal is frequently rooted in a deep discomfort with being emotionally exposed. The closer someone gets to them, the more intense this fear can become. Vulnerability requires a person to lower their defenses and allow another human being to see parts of them that they normally keep hidden. It means expressing fears, admitting insecurities, sharing needs, and trusting that those truths will be received with care rather than judgment. For many people, vulnerability is the foundation of intimacy. For an avoidant individual, however, vulnerability can feel like standing unprotected in the middle of a storm. This fear rarely develops without a reason. At some point in life, many avoidant individuals learned that emotional openness was unsafe. Perhaps their feelings were ignored when they were young. Perhaps they were criticized for expressing emotions. Perhaps they experienced rejection, betrayal, abandonment, or disappointment during important moments of their development. Whatever the source, they gradually formed an unconscious belief that depending on others creates risk. Over time, self reliance became their survival strategy. Instead of turning toward others when they felt hurt, they learned to handle problems alone. Instead of expressing emotional needs, they minimized them. Instead of seeking comfort, they sought control. These habits may have protected them in the past, but they often become obstacles when genuine love enters their lives. A healthy relationship naturally invites greater emotional closeness. As trust develops, partners begin sharing deeper parts of themselves. Conversations become more meaningful. Emotional dependence increases. The relationship moves beyond attraction and enters the realm of true intimacy. For someone who fears vulnerability, this stage can feel threatening. The very things that create connection in a relationship are the same things that activate their deepest fears. Every act of emotional openness requires them to move beyond the protective walls they have spent years building. When a partner says, I need you, when a partner asks, how do you really feel? When a partner wants deeper commitment, when a partner seeks emotional closeness. These moments may seem normal and healthy, but for an avoidant individual, they can trigger discomfort that feels difficult to explain. Part of the struggle comes from the fact that vulnerability removes certainty. Once you open your heart, you can no longer fully control the outcome. Another person has the power to disappoint you, misunderstand you, reject you, or walk away. While every relationship carries this possibility, avoidant individuals often focus intensely on these risks. As a result, they may begin creating emotional distance precisely when the relationship is becoming stronger. This behavior can seem confusing to their partners. The relationship appears healthy, affection exists, trust is growing. Everything seems to be moving in a positive direction. Then suddenly the avoidant person becomes less available, less expressive, or less engaged. What their partner often interprets as a loss of interest may actually be a reaction to increasing vulnerability. The deeper the connection becomes, the more exposed they feel. The more exposed they feel He's stronger than their urge to retreat into emotional safety. Another challenge is that vulnerability requires accepting imperfection. To be vulnerable means allowing another person to see weaknesses, mistakes, fears, and uncertainties. Many avoidant individuals work hard to maintain an image of strength, independence, and self sufficiency. They may feel uncomfortable revealing the parts of themselves that seem messy or incomplete. Yet, genuine intimacy cannot exist without authenticity. No relationship becomes truly deep when both people only show the safest parts of themselves. Love grows when people are willing to reveal who they really are. This creates an internal conflict for the avoidant individual. They desire connection, but they fear exposure. They want closeness, but they fear dependence. They long to be understood, yet they hesitate to reveal the truths that would allow understanding to happen. The painful reality is that vulnerability is often interpreted as danger when it is accepted. Truly the pathway to deeper love. The emotional discomfort they experience is not always evidence that something is wrong. In many cases, it is evidence that something meaningful is happening. Their heart is moving beyond protection and toward connection, but their old survival patterns continue pulling them back toward safety. Until they learn to recognize this dynamic, they may repeatedly withdraw from relationships not because intimacy is absent, but because intimacy is finally becoming real. One of the most defining characteristics of avoidant attachment is the tendency to create emotional distance when relationships begin to deepen. This behavior often confuses partners because it seems to happen at the exact moment when connection is becoming stronger. Just when trust is growing, communication is improving, and the relationship appears to be moving toward greater intimacy, the avoidant person may begin pulling away. To someone on the receiving end, this withdrawal can feel sudden and unexpected. They may wonder what changed. They may search for mistakes they made or assume the avoidant person has lost interest. Yet the truth is often far more complicated. In many cases, the avoidant individual is not responding to a lack of connection. They are responding to the increasing intensity of connection itself. As relationships progress, emotional bonds naturally become stronger. Shared experiences create attachment. Trust develops through consistency. Feelings deepen through vulnerability and mutual support. What once felt casual begins to feel significant. For most people, this deepening bond creates a sense of security. For an avoidant individual, however, it can trigger a sense of internal pressure. The relationship is no longer just a source of enjoyment. It is becoming emotionally important. And emotional importance creates vulnerability. The moment another person begins to matter deeply, the possibility of emotional pain becomes more real. The avoidant person may not consciously think about rejection, abandonment, disappointment, or loss, but their nervous system often reacts as if these threats are approaching. The closer they become to someone, the more exposed they feel. Because this discomfort is difficult to understand, they instinctively seek relief. Distance becomes that relief. Creating emotional space allows them to regain a sense of control. It reduces the intensity of vulnerability. It helps them temporarily escape feelings that seem overwhelming. Unfortunately, while distance may provide short term comfort, it often creates long term problems within the relationship. This distancing can take many forms. Some avoidants become less communicative. They take longer to respond to messages. They stop initiating conversations. They become emotionally unavailable during important discussions. Others immerse themselves in work, hobbies, personal projects, or responsibilities to justify creating space. Some may focus excessively on their partner's flaws, convincing themselves that the relationship is not as good as it once seemed. Others may suddenly express a desire for more independence despite previously enjoying closeness. These behaviors are rarely random. They are often unconscious attempts to reduce emotional intensity. The avoidant person is trying to create enough distance to feel emotionally safe again. One of the reasons this pattern is so difficult to break is that the temporary relief reinforces the behavior. When they pull away, their anxiety often decreases. They feel less pressure, less vulnerability, and less emotional exposure. This immediate sense of relief convinces them that distancing was the correct decision. What they fail to recognize is that they are treating vulnerability as the problem rather than understanding it as a natural part of intimacy. The irony is that many avoidant individuals genuinely desire close relationships. They want love, companionship, trust, and emotional connection. When those things begin to materialize, the fears associated with intimacy become activated. This creates a painful push and pull dynamic. Part of them wants closeness. Part of them fears closeness. Part of them wants commitment. Part of them fears what commitment requires. As a result, they may alternate between moving toward connection and retreating from it. Their partner often experiences this inconsistency as confusing and emotionally exhausting. One moment, the avoidant person appears loving, engaged, and invested. The next moment, they seem distant, detached, or uncertain. The relationship begins to feel unpredictable because the avoidant person's behavior is being driven by an internal conflict that neither person fully understands. Another important factor is that deeper relationships require increasing levels of emotional responsibility. As intimacy grows, partners become more involved in each other's emotional lives. Expectations around communication, support, and commitment naturally increase. For someone who values extreme independence, these expectations can feel restrictive rather than comforting. The avoidant person may begin worrying that they are losing their freedom, their autonomy, or their sense of self. Even healthy interdependence can feel threatening because it challenges the belief that emotional self sufficiency is the safest way to live. As a result, emotional distance becomes a protective mechanism. It serves as a way to preserve independence, reduce vulnerability, and avoid the fears that intimacy brings to the surface. Yet the very strategy designed to protect the relationship from pain often prevents the relationship from reaching the depth, trust, and connection that both people truly desire. Unhealed wounds from the past have a powerful way of influencing present relationships, often without a person fully realizing it. For many avoidant individuals, the challenges they face in love are not simply about the relationship in front of him. They are often carrying emotional experiences from years earlier that continue to shape how they think, feel, and respond to intimacy. These unresolved wounds become invisible filters through which every relationship is viewed. The difficulty is that emotional wounds do not remain confined to the past. Experiences may end, but the lessons we draw from them often stay with us. When someone has been deeply hurt, rejected, abandoned, criticized, or emotionally neglected, they naturally develop ways to protect themselves from experiencing that pain again. These protective patterns may provide temporary safety, but they can also create barriers that prevent genuine connection. For an avoidant person, one of the most common protective strategies is emotional self-reliance. Somewhere along the way, they may have learned that depending on others leads to disappointment. They may have concluded that needing people creates vulnerability, and vulnerability creates pain. Whether this belief formed during childhood or through painful adult experiences, it becomes deeply rooted in their understanding of relationships. As a result, they often enter new relationships carrying old fears. The partner standing in front of them may be trustworthy, supportive, and emotionally available. The relationship itself may be healthy, yet the avoidant person's reactions are not always based solely on present reality. Their nervous system may still be responding to wounds from the past. This creates a subtle but powerful problem. Instead of seeing the relationship clearly, they interpret current experiences through the lens of previous pain. A delayed text message may feel like rejection. A disagreement may feel like abandonment. A request for emotional closeness may feel like pressure. A discussion about commitment may feel like a threat to safety. The intensity of these reactions often has less to do with the present situation and more to do with unresolved emotional experiences that have never been fully processed. One reason these wounds remain so influential is that avoidant individuals frequently cope by suppressing difficult emotions rather than confronting them. They become skilled at pushing painful memories aside, staying busy, focusing on practical matters, or convincing themselves that past experiences no longer affect them. But emotional wounds do not disappear simply because they are ignored. What remains unhealed often resurfaces in unexpected ways. Fear becomes disguised as independence. Distrust becomes disguised as caution. Emotional distance becomes disguised as strength. Avoidance becomes disguised as self protection. The person may genuinely believe they have moved on from the past, yet their behavior continues to reflect old survival strategies. As relationships deepen, these unresolved wounds often become more visible. Intimacy has a way of exposing hidden fears because close relationships touch the very areas where past pain occurred. The deeper then, connection becomes, the more likely old emotional patterns are to emerge. For example, someone who experienced abandonment may become uncomfortable when a relationship starts feeling important because losing it would be painful. Someone who was emotionally neglected may struggle to trust consistent affection because it feels unfamiliar. Someone who was betrayed may find it difficult to fully open their heart even when there is no evidence that their current partner will hurt them. These reactions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that healing remains incomplete. The challenge is that many avoidant individuals mistake these emotional responses for evidence that the relationship itself is flawed. Instead of recognizing that an old wound has been activated, they may assume their discomfort means they are with the wrong person. They may focus on creating distance, questioning their feelings, or searching for reasons to withdraw. In reality, the relationship may simply be revealing areas of pain that still need attention. Every meaningful connection acts as a mirror. It reflects not only our capacity for love, but also the fears, insecurities, and wounds we carry within us. Healthy relationships often bring hidden emotional struggles to the surface, not because they create those struggles, but because they expose what has been buried for years. This is why healing is such an essential part of lasting love. Until past wounds are acknowledged and addressed, they continue influencing present choices. They shape perceptions, trigger fears, and create barriers where none may actually exist. The avoidant person may believe they are protecting themselves from future pain, while in reality they are allowing old pain to control their present life. The unresolved past quietly becomes the architect of current behavior, influencing decisions long after the original wounds were formed. One of the most significant struggles for many avoidant individuals is the tension between their desire for connection and their need for independence. While most people recognize that healthy relationships require a balance of both, avoidant individuals often place a much greater emphasis on self sufficiency. Independence becomes more than a personal preference, it becomes a source of emotional security. As a result, when a relationship begins demanding deeper levels of closeness, the need to protect independence can sometimes overpower the desire to maintain connection. At first glance, independence seems like a positive quality. It reflects confidence, self reliance, and personal responsibility. These are valuable traits that contribute to emotional maturity. The problem arises when independence becomes tied to emotional protection. Instead of being a healthy strength, it transforms into a defensive strategy designed to avoid vulnerability. For many avoidant individuals, depending on someone else feels risky. They may associate emotional dependence with weakness, disappointment, or loss of control. Because of this, they often take pride in handling challenges alone. They become accustomed to solving problems independently, processing emotions privately, and relying on themselves for support. Over time, this self sufficient lifestyle begins to feel safe. The less they need others, the less they can be hurt by others. The less emotionally dependent they become, the less vulnerable they feel. The more control they maintain, the more secure they believe they are. This mindset may work reasonably well when they are single or emotionally detached. However, serious relationships naturally challenge these beliefs. Love requires a certain degree of interdependence. Two people begin sharing their lives. They consider each other's needs. They support one another through difficulties. They become emotionally significant to each other. As this process unfolds, the avoidant individual may begin experiencing internal resistance. The relationship starts demanding ional investment that feels unfamiliar. Suddenly, another person's happiness matters. Another person's opinions carry weight. Another person's presence affects their emotional state. For someone who values complete independence, this can feel unsettling. The closer the relationship becomes, the more they may feel that their freedom is shrinking. They may start worrying that they are losing parts of themselves. Activities they once enjoyed alone now involve compromise. Decisions that once affected only them now influence someone else as well. Even healthy relationship expectations can begin feeling restrictive. A request for more communication may feel like pressure. A desire for greater commitment may feel like confinement. A need for emotional availability may feel overwhelming. The avoidant person often interprets these experiences through the lens of autonomy. Rather than viewing them as natural aspects of intimacy, they may perceive them as threats to personal freedom. As a result, they begin craving distance, not necessarily because they no longer care, not necessarily because the relationship is unhealthy, but because distance temporarily restores their sense of independence. This is where many avoidant individuals become trapped in a cycle. The relationship deepens, vulnerability increases, and the desire for autonomy grows stronger. To regain emotional balance, they pull away. The distance creates relief, which reinforces the belief that independence is the solution. Unfortunately, the relief is usually temporary. The underlying conflict remains unresolved. The desire for connection never completely disappears. Human beings are wired for relationships. Even highly independent people still long for understanding, companionship, and emotional support. The avoidant person may enjoy the freedom that distance provides, yet eventually feel the loneliness that often accompanies it. This creates a painful contradiction. They want closeness but fear dependence. They want love but resist vulnerability. They want partnership but struggle with the responsibilities that partnership requires. The deeper issue is that many avoidant individuals view independence and connection as opposing forces. In reality, healthy relationships do not require a person to sacrifice their individuality. Genuine intimacy does not eliminate freedom. Strong relationships allow people to remain independent while also remaining emotionally connected. The challenge is learning that autonomy and intimacy can coexist. A person can have personal goals, boundaries, and individuality while still being deeply committed to someone else. A person can maintain independence without creating emotional distance. A person can rely on others without losing their identity. For avoidant individuals, this understanding often represents a major shift in perspective. The goal is not to choose between freedom and love. The goal is to develop enough emotional security that closeness no longer feels like a threat to freedom. Until that happens, the instinct to protect independence may continue overpowering the desire for connection, causing them to step away from relationships that could otherwise provide profound meaning, growth, and fulfillment. Perhaps the most important truth to understand about avoidant behavior is that what appears to be falling out of love is often not a reflection of disappearing feelings at all. In many cases, it is a response to fear. The challenge is that fear rarely announces itself clearly. It does not always say, "I am afraid of vulnerability," or "I am scared of getting hurt." Instead, it disguises itself as doubt, confusion, emotional numbness, or a sudden urge to create distance. As a result, both the avoidant person and their partner may mistakenly believe that love has faded when something entirely different is happening beneath the surface. Fear has a remarkable ability to distort perception. When fear becomes activated, people often focus on or on potential threats than on present realities. The mind shifts into protection mode. It starts scanning for reasons why a situation might be unsafe. For an avoidant individual, a relationship that is becoming deeper and more meaningful can unintentionally trigger this response. The relationship may be healthy, the partner may be trustworthy, the connection may be genuine, yet the increasing emotional significance of the relationship creates vulnerability, and vulnerability awakens fear. Because this fear feels uncomfortable, the avoidant person naturally seeks an explanation for what they are experiencing. Instead of recognizing the emotional discomfort as fear, they may begin questioning their feelings. They may ask themselves, Do I really love this person? Am I with the right partner? Why don't I feel the same excitement I felt at the beginning? Shouldn't love feel easier than this? These questions often emerge during periods when the relationship is transitioning from infatuation to deeper intimacy. The initial excitement that once dominated the connection naturally begins to evolve into something calmer and more stable. However, avoidant individuals may misinterpret this shift. They mistake the absence of constant excitement for the absence of love. They mistake emotional vulnerability for incompatibility. They mistake fear for certainty. As a result, they may convince themselves that their changing emotional experience means the relationship is no longer right. What makes this process particularly difficult is that fear often creates real emotional distance. When someone becomes anxious about intimacy, they may withdraw emotionally to protect themselves. They communicate less. They become less affectionate. They spend less time connecting. Naturally, the relationship begins feeling different. The emotional closeness decreases. The warmth becomes less consistent. The sense of connection weakens. The avoidant person then observes this change and concurrently alludes that their feelings must be fading. In reality, their own protective behavior may be creating the very experience they are using as evidence. This cycle can become self-reinforcing. Fear leads to distance. Distance reduces connection. Reduced connection creates doubt. Doubt strengthens fear, and the pattern continues. Another reason fear is often mistaken for lost love is because fear encourages people to focus on negatives. The avoidant person may begin noticing flaws they previously overlooked. Small imperfections become larger. Minor disagreements feel more significant. Differences that once seemed manageable suddenly appear overwhelming. Their mind starts building a case for why the relationship is wrong. Not because the relationship has fundamentally changed, but because fear is searching for justification. If they can convince themselves that the relationship is the problem, they can avoid confronting the deeper emotional challenge taking place within them. This is why many avoidant individuals experience similar struggles across multiple relationships. Different partners may come and go, yet the same pattern repeatedly appears. The initial stages feel exciting, connection grows, vulnerability increases, fear emerges, doubt follows, distance develops. The external circumstances change, but the internal process remains remarkably similar. At the heart of this pattern is a misunderstanding of what love actually is. Love is not the absence of fear. Love is not perpetual excitement. Love is not constant emotional certainty. Real love often requires people to move through discomfort rather than escape it. It asks them to remain present when vulnerability arises. It invites them to trust despite uncertainty. It challenges them to stay emotionally engaged when their instincts urge them to retreat. For an avoidant individual, these moments can feel incredibly difficult because they confront the very fears that have shaped their emotional life for years. Yet the presence of fear does not automatically mean love is gone. In many cases, fear becomes strongest precisely when something truly matters. The relationship is important enough to create vulnerability, and vulnerability is important enough to awaken old protective instincts. What looks like falling out of love is often a struggle between two competing forces, the desire to connect and the desire to stay safe. The tragedy is that fear frequently wins not because love is absent, but because fear is misunderstood. Until that fear is recognized for what it truly is, many avoidant individuals continue interpreting emotional discomfort as evidence that their feelings have disappeared, when in reality their heart may still be deeply invested in the connection they are trying to escape. The brutal reality is that avoidants rarely lose love as suddenly as it appears more often. They lose the battle against the fears that love awakens within them. True transformation begins when we stop running from vulnerability, stop allowing old wounds to dictate our future, and recognize that genuine intimacy is not a threat but an opportunity for growth. The deepest relationships are built not by people who never feel fear, but by those who choose connection despite it. May this understanding inspire you to approach love with greater wisdom, courage, and compassion both for yourself and for others. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and keep choosing love over fear. Goodbye and take care.